In the last weeks of the Second World War, with Hitler's Third Reich on the brink of collapse, 70 German officers embarked on a desperate mission. They knew that the odds were stacked against them, but these were dangerous times. The German officers were prisoners of war captured by the Allies. They'd been told, "For you, the war is over." But they had other ideas. They were to attempt a mass escape, triggering one of the largest manhunts of the war. And yet, curiously, the story is almost unknown outside the pleasant market town of Bridgend in Wales. Bridgend in Glamorgan, South Wales, was not unlike thousands of other small towns throughout Britain during the war. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know everyone else, and nothing went by unnoticed.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
And like every other small community, it had its share of characters.
Well, Dr. Milne was a great family friend. We lived opposite him, and he had this Austin 16 car, I think it was. And he had this great portion for if ever he saw other people, he would take his hands off the wheel entirely and wave to people. The car sped along, whether it was on a bend or a curve. He always seemed to escape injury or collision. He had a charmed life.
For Arthur and the other children of Bridgend, the war was one big adventure.
And we all used to play Germans and British, and we always wanted to be on the British side, but a few of us had to be Germans. I often remember we used to have the best who could die, you know, and one of us would be on the hill as a lookout and pretend to be shot, and he'd roll down the sandhill. And I can remember my cousin Billy Davis. He was one of the best diers of all, and oh, he was so dramatic. He was tremendous. And he fell down what we called the big hill. He rolled all the way down. And when he got to the bottom, he was sick. So we didn't know what to do, really. We were only young then, of course.
And that was as close as the war came to Bridgend, until the day the German prisoners arrived. German prisoners of war were transported to the hundreds of prison camps scattered around Britain. Although well guarded, the prisoners took every opportunity to gather information that might be useful for an escape.
Right through the war, they started taking down road signs so that if anybody happened to drop into Britain, they'd find it difficult to find places. But it so happened that on the old carriages on the railway, they used to have maps. Now, they never bothered to take those down. So one of the Germans cut off his tail shirt and he drew a map. So he knew exactly where Bridgend was and where Porthcawl was. So it's typical of us as a British nation, you know, we think things through but forget about the obvious. My sister, Hilda, took me up to the railway station and we stood there for a while and this train pulled in and all these people came out with uniforms on and all looking around, and there was faces on them that they were no different than us, and there was a few of the older people up at the station. They were shouting, "Bloody Germans!" But mainly people were wary and not sure. Not sure.
The first time I saw the German prisoners was the SS marching down Merthyr Road. And they looked, to me, very smart and very arrogant. And they're marching down there, and they seem to be singing a rousing sort of a marching tune, loudly, and all the people on the doorsteps looking very sort of forlorn and sort of subdued.
You expect prisoners of war is supposed to be fairly shabby or badly dressed, but no, the officers especially, immaculate coats, great coats on, and they marched as if they were about to occupy us, not to come and be put into confinement, as it were.
Yeah, I remember holding my father's hand tightly there, and my grandmother, but I didn't like the look of them at all.
My main impression of the camp at the time was it was as I'd always imagined Butlins would be, and judging from the way that they came into it when they marched down the road, they almost appeared as if they were going to a holiday camp.
Prisoner of war camp number 198 was no Butlins. Reserved exclusively for officers, it was known as a black camp and was one of the most secure. It was surrounded by a mile-long perimeter fence consisting of a double row of barbed wire. Guards with dogs patrolled the camp day and night.
I don't know how many officers there were in the camp. Around 800, I think.
Yes, at least that. I think there could have been as many as 1,000.
In Camp 198, Nazi discipline held sway. And for those who no longer believed in Adolf Hitler's Third Reich, the camp was a dangerous place to be. Luftwaffe pilot Steffi Ehlert, who was 24, and Lieutenant Gerhard Fiegel, who was just 19, were sent there shortly before Christmas 1944.
My God, it's a lot smaller than I remember.
It's going to be one of these rooms. Must be just down the hall on this side. Oh, here it is. This is the room where it all happened.
Today, little remains of Camp 198 on the outskirts of Bridgend. Little that is, except for Hut 9, the one from which the escape took place. In 1945, the prison camp was run by Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Darling. Darling was a decorated hero of the First World War who had escaped from a German prisoner of war camp.
My father was about 6'1", very piercing blue eyes and two great dimples. And he was a great success with women who adored him. He looked like a cross between David Niven and John Le Measurer. And his favourite chat-up line was, "Don't be formal, just call me darling." Well, I think at one point I was trying to stand up for the Germans, say there must be some good ones, and he said, no, he said, there are no good Germans. But he said the French are worse. Well, he knew very well that the first thing beyond their minds would be how to get out. And he said that the huts were very close to barbed wire. He had been in touch with the War Office a good many times, nobody took any notice. It was a very busy time of the war. And they were just sort of left with this enormous horde of very energetic and enthusiastic young prisoners who were dying to get out.
We had nothing to do. We played at first cards or something like that, but that's not enough for people who just came out of the front, and therefore we always looked for activities without sitting down and playing cards.
Gerhard Fiegel joined the German army at the age of 17. He fought on the Russian front before being posted to France shortly after D-Day. Gerhard was captured during the fierce fighting at Le Havre.
Well, at Bridgend, a camp like all the others, but we had been only officers. That could be one of the reasons that we said we must do something. And that's the start of our escape.
The number one topic of conversation in those days was escape. Topic number two was women, no doubt about it. And we started to make plans. How can we get out of here?
Steffi Ehlert was an experienced reconnaissance pilot who was captured by American troops on the Western Front.
Das wurde ja auch vorgeschlagen. Zum Beispiel eine sehr lustige Sache wurde vorgeschlagen. Es war
Lots of suggestions were made. One rather cunning idea came up, for example. A high-voltage cable led away from the camp. It sloped away downwards over the fences. We were thinking of constructing a roller device with a seat suspended from it and then glide along the cable over the wire and over the fence. The problem was how to stop before smashing into the mast. We soon decided not to go ahead with this idea.
Irgendjemand kam auf die Idee.
Somebody had the idea, maybe we could build a hot air balloon. And we said, yes, okay, that's not a bad idea, but what about the feasibility? First, we didn't have any of the materials. Second, what about the preparations? It would have been impossible to conceal this from the guards. It would definitely have been noticed. And third, if we were to launch the balloon, it would have been shot down. So this was totally out of the question. One man was thinking of pole vaulting. A pole vault over the first fence and then another pole vault over the second. But that too, well, maybe a good sportsman could have done it, but not the majority of those men.
The camp was run by the senior German officers, many of whom were committed Nazis. With the Third Reich in its death throes, there were scores to be settled, and Camp 198 was not a safe place to be. Adolf Hitler's birthday was just weeks away, and the Nazis who ran the camp decided that everyone should send a greetings card to the Führer. It's astonishing to think that the prisoners' letters were duly dispatched from Bridgend to Berlin. For those who chose not to take up the Nazis' kind invitation, the consequences were severe. One night in January, the guards heard screaming coming from the huts, but the screams were soon stifled, and they chose not to investigate. The following morning, Otto Iskat, a former Nazi who had turned against the regime, was discovered in his bunk, barely conscious. He died a few days later. Sinister rumors about what was going on inside Camp 198 abounded outside the wire.
Curiosity of children, we used to go down and try and get as near as we could to look and peer at the barbed wire and things, you know. Just to see it, we used to walk around it and things, as kids do. Want to explore and know who got nearest to the wire, and so, you know, who saw what and swap stories in school and things, you know.
I don't think that the local people were terribly worried about having them there. I suppose Bridgend, for example, has always had a couple of large mental hospitals on the outskirts. And I thought that the Germans weren't any more dangerous than prisoners would be in the local mental hospitals.
For many of the young officers, the atmosphere in the camp only served to encourage thoughts of escape.
Ja, das einzige Möglichkeit ist, einen Tunnel unter den Draht herzustellen.
It was decided that our only chance was to tunnel under the fence, and the excavation work started. A large hole was chiseled in the floor of a hut adjacent to the fence, and a shaft was dug about 1.8 meters deep. The shaft was dug by a wall where the bed stood, and the bed was then placed over the opening. And a POW with artistic talents drew a magnificent female nude on the wall above the bed. That was quite a good scheme. Whenever a guard came in, he would say,
"Oh, what a pretty lady."
My father fully expected them to try to escape, because it was the duty of every prisoner of war to try and escape. If you didn't, you were considered to be a bit of a wimp.
A young man wants to have adventures, and it was something. It was more than an adventure, nearly impossible, but to try it.
You were thinking about it. Maybe we could get home. It goes without saying that we all had the craving to get home. We all wanted to help the folks back home because the situation in Germany was not good. One thing was certain in any case. We did not want to go back to fight the war.
We must be getting close to where the tunnel is. The tunnel was probably over there.
Da kann ich mich nicht.
Hey, hier ist es! Hier ist er!
Here it is. It's here.
Natürlich.
You think so?
Da.
This is it, of course. There. No. There it is. The bed was there, of course.
Well, I think it's very unlikely that it's here, as we weren't stupid enough to make a tunnel 2, 3 or 4 meters longer than necessary.
This is it. This is it.
Well, I can't be sure.
Well, that's what I say.
I can't make that assumption.
You need other people to work. You need people to watch. You need people to some things you need to grab and so on. It became bigger and bigger, and there were organization.
The guards noticed that the German officers had developed a keen interest in gardening. This was, of course, the standard method of dispersing earth from a tunnel. What the guards failed to notice was that in Hut 9, the one in which the tunnel started, half a room was missing.
This is the washroom. We built the false wall here to hide the earth from the tunnel.
Possibly. I remember it a bit differently. Oh, the clay is there on the ground. It must have been the wall we built. That's it. They haven't cleared it away. This is still the earth from the tunnel. Look, it's nice and hard.
Die Gangerde ist das hier. Als der Gang etwas weiter fortgetrieben war, kriegten einige die...
As the tunnel advanced, some of the men working in the front line experienced palpitations and fainting fits, raising doubts as to whether we may have to give up. But we had some ingenious thinkers among us who constructed an air pipe out of empty milk tins, which could be easily extended by adding further tins. Then a blower was constructed out of metal canisters, which served to blow air to the end of the tunnel. One funny thing, maybe this is not such a good thing to say in the presence of ladies. Anyway, the operator held the appliance between his legs, cranking the handle. One day, he'd had bean soup for lunch. Suddenly, a furious scream came from the men working at the tunnel. He had conveyed his digestive gases into the tunnel.
Lieutenant Colonel Darling's concerns about camp security, together with the prisoners' irksome high spirits, led to many a sleepless night.
We had precautionary measures, such as a choir being set up in the neighbouring hut, drowning out all digging noises with its singing. And after lights out, we set the flushing mechanisms on the urinals to flush at short intervals, adjusting the nozzles to produce the maximum of noise.
My My father would have been aware he'd been in prison of war himself and escaped and been caught again. He would have known all the tricks, you know, the classic one of making an awful lot of noise to distract everybody. He would have known all that.
Darling's complaints to the War Office about security at the camp had fallen on deaf ears, and despite his best efforts, the prisoners remained one step ahead.
The first barrack just near the gate got a lamp, and if they put it 3 times, 3 times means they are coming roll call. The British, the guards are coming in, that means stop there. And this was given to the other barracks, and everywhere 3 times, 3 times, 3 times. And therefore they couldn't catch us because we always have been warned.
With an elaborate system of lookouts and well-organized teams of diggers, the tunnel progressed swiftly.
When we had the longness we wanted, it became to go out. And on this day, the last man had a long iron piece and he put a hole in above. Then he had a cigarette and he smoked the cigarette and looked down. Where comes the smoke? Where comes it?
We stood here and someone puffed smoke out. I saw it. He poked a rod through, and when he got to the end of the tunnel, the guy lit his cigarette at the end of the tunnel, and we stood here. And we were wondering where the smoke would come out.
That can't be. I thought that was daytime. We only worked at night.
No. Wait. It was finished. It was over. We needed to work out where the tunnel came out because we didn't know.
No. We had experts there.
No.
Everything was measured to the millimetre.
We always took measurements, yes, but we measured the tunnel. There were estimates, but they were all guesses.
No. The tunnel was measured to the exact millimetre and centimetre.
After 4 months' work, the 60-foot tunnel was complete, and the night of Saturday, the 10th of March, 1945, was chosen for the escape.
We put everything in place, got everything ready, checked our clothes. Then we were called to come into the room with the tunnel access. We were checked thoroughly. Was anyone wearing white? Was there anything suspicious about us? Then we had to climb onto a stool and jump off to detect any rattle. And once all this had been found to be in order, we got the okay to leave.
The escapees had few civilian clothes, no papers, and little money. They knew that even if they got out of the camp, they were still a long way from home. But for Steffi Ehlert and Gerhard Fiegel and nearly 70 other German officers, the Great Escape was about to begin. Just before midnight on the 10th of March 1945, the first of the 67 German prisoners escaped from Camp 198 and vanished into the Welsh countryside.
I came out, looked around, and saw the first time my camp in the night. It was a fine. It was. I liked it.
Könnte es hier sein?
Aha! Could this be it? This could be it.
Yes, you're right. Look, there's a hollow.
It could be. Could be.
Look, this hollow wouldn't come about naturally.
No, it's nothing to do with foxes or anything like that. This could be it. It's great to think we crept out of here.
Considering it was 60 years ago, it survived quite well, one has to say.
It's a real hollow. It's like a grave. The grave of the unknown escaper. It's like a memorial.
I'm glad we've seen it.
Well, we've seen it. We should feel good about it. We did it ourselves and nobody's here to praise us. Well, we're going to praise ourselves. That hole was great. It was a great thing.
Nearly 60 years after the last man left the tunnel, it was reopened. Remarkably, the tunnel is virtually intact, with the shoring, constructed using timber from the prisoners' bunks, still in place. It was along this very tunnel that the German officers crawled, beginning their desperate bid for freedom. Steffi Ehlert and his team planned to steal one of the few cars in Bridgend, the one belonging to the village doctor. It was a good plan, almost foolproof.
Das Auto sprang nicht an. Da kamen
Well, the car wouldn't start. Then 3 soldiers approached from the exit of our camp.
Whether they were too well oiled with drink, I'm not sure, I don't know, but they volunteered, they helped to jump-start the car and set them on their way.
That I could believe, because, gosh, I don't know, we won the war, really, do.
Die waren sehr freundlich und zuvorkommend, wie nun.
They were very kind and obliging, as British soldiers often are. And this is how we got the car started.
While Steffi and his team were escaping in style, Gerhard and the other hopefuls were taking the more conventional approach.
And now, as fast as possible away and west. Our target has been Swansea. We hoped that at the harbor we wanted to capture a boat or some fisher boat or something like that. From there we could go in the Irish Sea and to Ireland, and Ireland had been neutral at that time.
Steffi, an experienced reconnaissance pilot, was planning to find an airfield, take an aircraft and fly home. But navigation on the ground was proving a problem.
Das haben wir ja gemerkt, als wir plötzlich
After our escape, we realized that no signposts were left on any of the English roads. This was a huge setback for us. So it was impossible to find one's way. And then we met a late-night hiker, and we asked him,
"Excuse me, which is the way to Gloucester?"
I think you mean Gloucester.
Now that was a real shock for us. Damn it, that was a bit of a blunder. We didn't realize it was pronounced Gloucester, but then Hans Hartzheim told him that we were Danes.
We're all Danish.
I'm going that way, let me jump in, I'll show you. All right, boys?
Yes, rather. Thank you. Die Schwierigkeiten waren uns bekannt.
We knew the obstacles we were facing, and they were huge. Only time would tell whether we would get through or not. We were hopeful, but unshakable, firm belief, no.
The tunnel was discovered early on Sunday morning, and 11 prisoners were immediately recaptured near the exit.
Where's my bloody car gone?
Lieutenant Colonel Darling, the commander of the camp, quickly realized that this was a mass escape and put in a priority call to Bridgend Police Station.
Bridgend Police Station. Have they? The bastards.
This is the BBC Home Service. Here is the midnight news for today, Sunday the 11th of March. 70 Germans escaped from a prisoner of war camp at Bridgend, Glamorgan last night.
Frustrated by the lack of interest from the War Office and realizing that an escape attempt was inevitable, months earlier, Darling and Bridgend Superintendent of Police William May had drawn up a secret plan known as Plan X. Plan X decreed that the initial search would be conducted solely by the police. But the escape from Camp 198 was so large and the perceived security threat so great that the plan was swiftly accelerated to its second stage. Armed soldiers, police, home guards and civilians all joined in the search.
When I first heard about it, it came through on the radio. And we were all aware then that something had happened, so I suppose everybody went to their gates and looked up and down the road first thing to see if we could see anybody running in any direction.
It was my grandmother, I think, living with us there. She heard it first over the garden wall from Mrs. May, you know. And like bad news, it travels fast. And they just from one to another, and the whizzes around the town, they escape, you know, all German fans, hoo-ha, hullabaloo.
And everybody was looking everywhere. There was so much excitement going on. Walter Richards went in his pigeon cart and all to see if anybody had been in there. Looking back, it must have been a bit funny because the people went over the top looking in places where nobody could possibly get.
Plan X was a fine plan, but problems were to arise with its implementation. Suspecting that the mass escape might be part of a coordinated sabotage attempt, Superintendent May needed a way of tracking the movement of the escapees. He asked for 56 little flags mounted on map pins to be prepared, each representing an escaped prisoner still at large.
And we heard suddenly dogs bark, and we went in the hedge and waited. And they came. And I won't forget it. You heard the dogs. And now you do nothing. Your heart is, my goodness. And the dog went far away. They talked about it, and they hadn't seen us. We reached a railway line. We thought that it must go to West and Swansea. That must be the train who goes in this direction.
Und dann haben wir am Schluss, als das Benzin
In the end, when the petrol had run out and it started to get light, we decided that we needed to find a place to stay. And when we'd stretched out for a rest, we were approached by a cow right up against the fence. It was staring at us. It was soon joined by a second cow, and then a third, and in the end, we had 12 cows gazing at us with trusting eyes. And we thought, dear, oh dear, such affection is totally undeserved. And also, their staring will attract attention. Well, we resolved to leave, and we looked for another hideout.
Within 48 hours of the escape being discovered, thousands of highly trained troops, together with the Home Guard, had sealed off the area around Bridgend. Roadblocks were established. Houses, barns and outbuildings were subjected to an exhaustive search. An escape of this magnitude was front-page news.
The press went mad. There were headlines all over the place, and quite ridiculous ones, and I was very much teased at the art college I was at, being told that my father had let all the German prisoners out.
With the gentleman of the press snapping at his heels, Superintendent May needed results. The natural friendliness of the Welsh was to provide him with an early success. When 3 escapees disguised as miners boarded a bus and didn't talk, this very un-Welsh behaviour immediately aroused suspicion. The bus made a detour to the police station.
It was a time of quite wild excitement, especially for the children in the area. A lot of them went round and organised search parties.
Groups of children, we scuttled off down to the central, some on bikes and some just walking and running, and hoping that we might find a German hiding somewhere in the castle.
Acting on tip-offs from local children, the police recaptured several escapees just a few miles from the camp.
It was exciting. Bridgend was not exactly the centre of the universe at that time, and this is the most exciting thing that had happened, so we wanted to be as much a part of it as we could.
And my brother came home, he rushed under the stairs, and he got my father's rifle out. And he jumped on his drop-handle rally racing bike, and off he went. So about half hour later, my father came home, went under the stairs to get his rifle, and it had gone. So he turned to my mother, "Nancy, where's my bloody rifle gone?" So my mother said, "I don't know." She said, "Tommy's been home." He said, "That little bugger, he's taken my rifle," he said. "Where the hell's he gone?" There was no ammunition with this rifle anyway. So what they were going to do, I don't know. Hit them over the head with it, I suppose.
SS officer Karl Ludwig and fellow escapee Heinz Herzler were to encounter a Bridgend local wielding an unusual weapon.
A civilian coming back home to his dear wife was away for drink, and his wife wouldn't let him in, and all sort of commotions. And unknown to all parties concerned, there were 2 German officers hiding in the bushes. It can't be everybody who has urinated on an SS officer and lived to tell the tale.
This is the BBC Home Service, and here is the news for Monday the 12th of March. The hunt goes on for the German prisoners still at large after escaping from the prisoner of war camp at Bridgend, Glamorgan. It is thought that the men, including rough, fanatical young Nazis and SS officers, may have stolen shotguns from neighbouring farms. The police have appealed to everyone in the district to keep their houses securely locked.
As the alarm spread, the danger of local people taking the law into their own hands became a reality. Howard Grossley, a Canadian soldier with a violent temper, told the family with whom he was lodging just what he would do if he came across a German prisoner on the run.
Frei gefühlt haben wir uns nicht.
We did not feel free, because we weren't free after all. We were still prisoners of war. It's true, we escaped from a prison camp, but we'd not gained freedom. We couldn't just walk into the next pub or cafe. That was not possible, so we were not free.
We were chased, and when you are chased and you're always on the way, in every corner there could be someone. That makes you feel they were hunting us like animals.
There's people here to see you.
3 days after the escape, Superintendent May received the news he had been dreading. A woman lay dying in hospital with a gunshot wound to her stomach. The woman, Lily Griffiths, claimed that she'd been attacked by the Germans. With 16 potentially dangerous escapees still at large, the manhunt intensified. But Superintendent May doubted her story. Forensic tests on a bullet found in Mrs. Newlin's front room, the bullet that had passed through Lily Griffiths, revealed that it had come from Howard Grossley's gun. When confronted with this evidence, Lily was to tell a different story. On the night of the 12th of March, Howard, who was Lily's lover, invited her out for a walk. Howard had been drinking heavily, and they started arguing. He flew into a rage, took out his gun, and shot her. Seeking an alibi, Howard persuaded Lily to tell the police that they had been attacked by Germans. Within hours of making her statement, Lily died, and Howard Grossley was hung for his crime of passion. The fugitives were becoming desperate. Exhausted after 4 days on the run, with little or no food, time was running out. When Miss Olive Nicol, Glamorgan Commissioner for Girl Guides, confronted 2 Germans armed only with a saucepan and a full English breakfast, they offered little resistance. The escapees had dreamed of getting back to Germany, but in reality most didn't get far from Bridgend. Some lucky ones made it as far as the ports of Swansea and Southampton, 150 miles from the camp. But then there was the almost insurmountable problem of crossing the sea. And by the 15th of March, 5 days after the escape, there were only a handful of Germans still at large.
Haben wir dieses Tälchen gefunden mit einem klaren Wasser.
We found this little valley with a stream of clear water and dense undergrowth, and we thought this is where we'll spend the day. It's a good hiding place, and we made ourselves comfortable. Hans Hartzheim said, "Well, I'll have a look if I can find a town around here where I can buy some food and maybe a newspaper." Hans Hartzheim returned after a while, waving his newspaper. He told us, "Look, we're in the paper. 6 of us are still at large, 1 group of 4 and 1 group of 2. Then we made ourselves comfortable and had something to eat.
100 miles to the northeast of Bridgend, just outside Birmingham and close to an aerodrome, Steffi and his team had almost reached their goal.
And then we heard aircraft engine noise, and we thought the airfield must be nearby. It can't be more than a kilometre away at most. And we were blissfully at ease. Hans was reading his paper, Werner Silasko stretched out asleep and dreaming, Oswald Prior was cleaning his fingernails, and me thinking about what planes we might find once we got to the airfield. Judging by the noise, we could hear a twin-engine plane. So we were perfectly happy, thinking, who would come looking for us here? And anyway, who could find us in this thicket? And suddenly, like a bolt from the blue, a flash, an impact, and the words, hands up, had an electrifying effect on us. At that point, we all gave up.
Gerhard never reached his fishing boat. He was caught near Swansea.
We were recaptured on a day, and there were about 4 or 5 home guards who saw us and said, hands up. And 5 or 10 minutes later, a police car came with 3 policemen in it. Very polite. They took us to the station. They brought us tea.
This is the BBC Home Service, and here is the news for Friday the 16th of March. The last of the 70 Germans who tunnelled their way out through a prisoner of war camp in Bridgend, Glamorgan, were recaptured today.
Then came our guards. They took us back again, and we were home again. Home in our camp, and it was warm.
We felt very disappointed in not being able to go home. But on the other hand, we realized, towards the end of the war, it was probably better not to have succeeded, because our chances to make it home alive were written in the stars. It was by no means a certainty.
With the last prisoner safely back, behind the wire, and the excitement over, life in Bridgend swiftly returned to normal.
They were back there, the hoo-ha died down. They were back safe, locked up. And that was that. Next day was conquest.
The war in Europe ended just a few weeks later, and the story of the Welsh Great Escape was soon forgotten everywhere. Everywhere, that is, except for in the pleasant market town of Bridgend.